I think most of us has heard the phrase cultural appropriation thrown around recently. We hear it being brought up in the news and at the center of discussion. Most commentators treat this concept that we, as a first world society, should be concerned about. It's an issue that is certainly still up for debate, mostly whether it's acceptable or not. But should people really make that much of a big deal about it? We are currently in a social and political landscape where we can be deeply sensitized to, well, pretty much anything, with racism and discrimination of course being no exception. That's not to say that anybody hasn't got every right to be offended. I think that it's very important that we all question the integrity and actions of others. That's how we improve upon us and do better for ourselves. When it comes to quote-unquote appropriating someone's culture, we can see some taking part in the practices and the values of another culture, and some would often see that as offensive to the culture in question, and then they apply that idea to any situation, which is part of how cultural appropriation can be misunderstood. For those that don't know what cultural appropriation is, it's a term to describe a dominant culture adopting the values and elements which are usually present in a minority culture, which can often be seen portrayed in a harmful light. Say, if a white person wears a headset that was originated in a more disadvantaged culture, someone from that minority background can come and call out on them for being racist or cultural appropriation. And in sociology terms, the line that's drawn between appreciation and appropriation is where someone uses these elements outside of the original cultural context and going as far as to make a bit of coin out of it. It's a topic that still enraptures me, and I say that very loosely because on one hand, these people that do partake in certain beliefs and values are very likely going into them with a blank mind and not having any experience or baggage with them to have a better understanding of it. And from the perspective of those who are oppressed, they're more likely to cringe at something that they personally disapprove of because it demeans their moral standards. I can at least acknowledge that argument that a lot of people make, but that really shouldn't stop others from learning those standards and principles that's been adopted from that specific culture. It's part of our sociological foundation and civilization that we share each other's cultural values. If we didn't live like that, then we would live in a society where we would operate and function on the same basis. If you think about it, that would be really boring. They have every right to experience other people's cultures, and people just can't put individuals up to scrutiny and shame when they adopt these values and perpetuate it to everyone like they should be oppressed as well. Western societies can adapt other non-Western values and principles while still acknowledging their own. Let's say someone who was born and raised in America who appears as Caucasian and primarily spoke English, they can also speak a number of other languages such as Spanish, Chinese, and Portuguese. And even people of color or different ethnicity can be raised under Western culture, and they can choose whether they can live with it or adopt different principles and values in another ethnicity. That's just personal preference. I'm sure people who can adopt certain ideas and beliefs isn't causing any harm or have the attention to oppress people. If someone that was not originally based from that culture has done enough research about it and has studied the beliefs, ethics, and values, then surely they wouldn't have the intention to cause any harm. People often make the claim that it's offensive to wear certain types of clothing or accessories that represent a particular culture, or make movies set in a non-Western country because it demeans and oppresses them. It's weird for people to look at others adopting elements from one culture and just assume that they're oppressing people just based on what they wear. It's one of many examples of when someone can jump to ridiculous conclusions where someone is causing oppression towards a culture just because they're wearing something trivial, such as a necklace. I mean, not everyone has the same fashion sense, guys. I think that's pretty obvious. It's even more embarrassing when it's people who aren't part of that specific culture are the ones that get offended on their behalf. This white guy is making a movie about dogs set in Japan? Racism! Says a white journalist who's probably never even been to Japan in his life. Some just can't accept the fact that people just want to experiment with their looks and engage with another culture. People have been doing it for ages. If we look at this concept the other way around, when we see someone of Asian descent wearing an Adidas shirt, is that bad because they're going against their own traditional values? It goes back to the point I made earlier that it's part of a sociological foundation that we as a functioning society should share and embrace each other's values. Cultural appropriation is more often brought up when it comes to pop culture, usually when someone who creates music or makes movies or even more traditional forms of art that depicts a specific culture as part of creative expression. There are plenty of examples out there, including when Kylie Jenner was accused of cultural appropriation when she wore items of Latin clothing from the Chola culture, and there have been criticism made against her that claims that she's been taking all the credit for it. The reason why people make these claims is that Kylie Jenner is a high-profile figure, so of course the media is going to give it a lot of publicity and attention. It happens to every member of the Kardashian Kardashian family, no matter what they do. Same applies to any celebrity. When they make this statement that she's perfecting the type of fashion, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a fact. The tabloids are going to eat it up and they're always going to make ludicrous statements. Kylie Jenner isn't going to take anything away from the Latin culture, nor is Justin Bieber going to claim someone else's identity because he's going around with dreadlocks. I hate it when people falsely scrutinize things and other people for cultural appropriation, because that ultimately paints a bad image on them, which makes the cultural appropriation argument pathetic. The main point I want to get across with this video is whether cultural appropriation is really that much of a problem. Now, I can see why someone could be offended if someone was intended to perpetuate racism, but we shouldn't go as far as to ban Western cultures from making and eating food such as kebabs because it offends Middle Eastern people. If we quote a popular line from a foreign movie, does that mean that we're appropriating their culture? If someone watches anime, then that means they're appropriating Japanese culture. In fact, I've never heard a case where an anime fan was accused of cultural appropriation. There's a lot of individuals that just want to create fear and panic out of an issue like appropriating culture and make themselves out to be the so-called hero and savior of the situation, despite their reasoning not being justifiable as to what is accepted as cultural appropriation. Take, for example, this tweet when this fella made the accusation that this woman was appropriating Chinese culture for wearing a dress of Chinese descent for her prom night. Pretty much what I've said in this video can be applied to my thoughts to this tweet and this whole story in general. I want to know what makes these people think that just because someone is wearing an item of clothing that originates from another culture apparently makes them racist. I just don't understand. The evidence that he presents to us isn't justified. There seems to be no sign of the woman capitalizing off the culture, nor painting the Chinese culture in a negative light, at least according to her response to this ordeal. Honestly, if I was in his shoes, I would see no reason to get upset nor to disseminate it. And it really shouldn't be brought up, neither it should raise concern on this issue in the first place, as this situation seems so trivial. The question I want to raise with this video is that, is it really that much of a big deal? Well, I guess it kind of depends on how you look at things morally, but in my opinion, it really shouldn't. Right now, I and a lot of others see this concept as convoluted, and there is people part of the discussion having the narrow mindset that is not coming to the consensus of what cultural appropriation actually is, leading to what will continue to stir an inundated and harsh debate. When people are going to adopt someone else's culture, they are certainly not going to take your culture away, and if you're going to set an example for cultural appropriation to people who would most likely be neutral to the topic, don't make it embarrassing and have a legitimate excuse with you. Otherwise, why would you think you have what it takes to stop them? Just let them go to their own devices.